Rain hammered the glass walls of the Monroe Hotel with a violence that didn't match the quiet luxury inside. It wasn't peaceful rainfall or gentle drizzle, it was the sky beating down as if trying to warn anyone who cared enough to listen. But warnings don't matter to people already drowning, and Carter Hayes had been drowning long before this storm showed up. He sat alone at a table pressed against the window, his reflection barely visible through the sheets of water racing down the glass. His hands shook around a medical bill he'd already read too many times. The paper had creases so deep they looked carved, and the ink felt heavier each time his eyes passed over the numbers. Those numbers weren't just digits, they were accusations. They represented every hour he'd worked and every hour he didn't have left to give. Warehouse night shifts that blurred into delivery mornings. Mechanic jobs squeezed into weekends when he wanted nothing more than to sleep. Odd jobs he accepted even when his body protested with aches that reminded him he wasn't invincible. He'd done everything, and yet it wasn't enough. Haven's treatment kept climbing beyond reach, like the world was daring him to try harder when he had nothing left to burn. Most people like to believe hard work solves everything. They preach resilience as if it guarantees a reward. But reality doesn't follow motivational posters. Carter's reality certainly didn't. He was a single father trying to keep his daughter alive in a world that cared more about invoices than human beings. Pride wasn't a luxury he had anymore. It had been stripped away piece by piece, leaving him raw, tired, and desperate in a way he couldn't express out loud. He lowered his head, rubbing the bridge of his nose, telling himself he'd figure something out like he always had. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't believe his own lie. Then the hotel doors slid open, and something, or rather someone, shifted the air in the room. Adelaide Monroe stepped inside. Even soaking wet, she carried herself with the presence of someone used to owning every room she walked into. Her scarlet dress clung to her frame, water dripping off the hem and pooling onto the marble floor. The staff glanced toward her with a mixture of caution and reverence, unsure whether to approach or keep their distance. Stories about her ran through the city like urban myths, some exaggerated, some painfully true. She was the CEO people admired from afar but never wanted to cross. Sharp, decisive, unshakable, intimidating. The kind of woman whose ambition had turned her into an institution. But right now, she didn't look powerful. She looked abandoned. There was a heaviness in her eyes, the kind people carry after too many nights with no one to talk to and too many mornings waking up to silence. She scanned the cafe until her gaze landed on Carter. She didn't hesitate, just walked straight toward him with unsettling purpose. When she reached his table, she didn't bother sitting. Instead, she dropped a thick envelope in front of him. It landed with a dull weight, unmistakable even before he touched it. "I need a man to pretend to be my husband for a week," she said, her voice calm and eerily steady despite the storm clinging to her dress. "I'll pay you $10,000. Carter blinked at her, wondering if sleep deprivation had finally broken something in his brain. He expected cameras to reveal a prank, or someone to laugh, or her to reveal she'd mistaken him for someone else. But Adelaide Monroe didn't strike him as the type who made mistakes, not ones this big, anyway. He glanced at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "Why me?" Her jaw tightened a fraction. "You look normal. Uncomplicated. Someone no one would question." He almost laughed. Normal was just another word for invisible. And right now, invisible was all he could afford to be. Adelaide's voice didn't waver, but something beneath it trembled. "The board is circling. They think I'm unstable. If I don't look grounded, married, settled, they'll move to replace me." The words were businesslike, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. Fear. Vulnerability. A woman who'd built walls so high she didn't know how to ask for help without framing it like a contract. Carter exhaled, a tired, defeated sound. "Why pay a stranger? Surely someone." "I don't trust people I know," she cut in. "And you trust me?" "No. But you don't want anything from me except the money. That makes you safer." It wasn't a compliment. It was honesty. And honesty was something Carter had been starved for. He looked at the envelope again. $10,000. It wasn't enough to solve everything, but it was enough to buy time, precious time Haven needed. He didn't want this. He didn't want to step into a world he had no business being in. He didn't want to fake affection, fake commitment, or fake intimacy with a woman who seemed allergic to the concept. But choices made under desperation aren't true choices. They're survival mechanisms. He thought of Haven lying in her hospital bed, stars painted on the ceiling because she loved space but couldn't see the world clearly without help. He thought of her small voice asking him, always gently, as if afraid he'd shatter, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" He'd run out of answers. Adelaide extended her hand. It was steady, elegant, detached. A businesswoman offering a cold transaction. Carter shook it anyway. And that single decision, made out of fear, exhaustion, and love, threw him into a world he never imagined entering. Adelaide's penthouse was a different universe. It stood above the city like a throne carved from steel and glass. When the elevator doors opened, Carter felt as if he were stepping into someone's meticulously curated museum. Marble floors. Symmetrical furniture. Art pieces that probably cost more than he earned in a year. Everything polished to perfection. Everything quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Adelaide walked ahead of him with her usual composed posture, not once glancing back to see if he followed. She moved like someone who'd learned not to rely on anyone to be behind her. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to one of the expansive couches. He did, feeling painfully out of place. She remained standing. "We need to cover the rules," she said. She handed him a stack of printed notes. Bullet points. Timelines. Fake memories. A script of their love story, written with the same precision she probably used for quarterly reports. This wasn't just a lie. It was a performance. He listened, numb but attentive, trying to memorize details he didn't care about but needed to survive. She outlined their supposed first meeting, their fabricated dates, their inside jokes, even how long they'd allegedly been married. It felt mechanical. Emotionless. Hollow. But then something cracked. When she mentioned introducing him to her board, she paused, not dramatically, but just long enough for him to notice the faint tremor in her breath. Her gaze dropped, and for the briefest moment, her voice softened. "My family won't be present," she murmured. "They're unavailable." The room went quiet in a heavy, suffocating way. He didn't ask questions. Her tone warned him not to. But that moment, the tiniest crack in her armor, was the first time he realized she wasn't just protecting a career. She was protecting whatever fragile pieces of herself still existed beneath all that concrete. Their first public appearance came later that week, at a charity event held in a sunlit garden behind the company headquarters. Photographers hovered like mosquitoes, clicking nonstop. Executives whispered behind manicured hands. Adelaide's posture stayed perfect, stiff, and icy. Her hand hovered near his as if touch was forbidden territory. Carter noticed her breathing, shallow, controlled, rehearsed. She wasn't afraid of the public. She was afraid of their judgment. Without thinking, he placed his hand over hers. A simple gesture. Human warmth. Nothing strategic. Nothing rehearsed. Her reaction was immediate. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. She inhaled like she hadn't taken a proper breath in years. Her fingers didn't curl into his, but she didn't pull away either. And in that tiny moment, beneath the noise and the cameras, her facade fractured just enough for him to glimpse the woman beneath the myth. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Adelaide worked late every night, burying herself in tasks long after exhaustion should have forced her to stop. It wasn't dedication, it was avoidance. She was terrified of stillness. Terrified of remembering. Terrified of feeling anything that might break the armor she'd built. Meanwhile, Carter lived two lives. Each morning, he visited Haven at the hospital. He read her stories, held her small hand, and pretended everything was okay. Her smile, weak but bright, kept him breathing. She pointed at the photo he'd shown her of Adelaide and called her, the pretty lady in the red dress. Carter had laughed at that, never expecting those two worlds to collide. But life has a twisted sense of timing. On the fourth day, Adelaide showed up at the hospital unannounced. Carter walked into Haven's room and froze. Adelaide, the woman who walked through boardrooms like a storm, was sitting beside his daughter's bed reading a fairy tale in a soft, careful voice, turning each page like it might crumble in her hands. Haven was laughing, really laughing, a sound Carter hadn't heard in months. And Adelaide looked different. Alive. Human. Someone rediscovering pieces of herself she'd buried years ago. Something shifted that day, something real. When they returned to the penthouse, Adelaide didn't retreat into her walls. Instead, she sat at a grand piano coated in dust, fingers hovering above the keys. "I haven't touched this since my mother died," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. Carter didn't offer comfort or platitudes. He just sat beside her and listened as she talked, haltingly, painfully, about a mother who believed in her, a father who didn't, and a world that rewarded her for becoming cold. That night, for the first time, Carter didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like someone witnessing a woman trying to remember how to be alive. As the week went on, the line between acting and feeling blurred. Not dramatically, not like a romance novel cliché, slowly, almost unwillingly. Adelaide found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. She noticed the way he carried pain with quiet strength, the way he softened when he talked about Haven, the way he stood up for others even when he had nothing left himself. Carter found himself drawn to the woman behind the CEO, someone fragile and starving for connection. He didn't fall for her power. He fell for her humanity she tried so hard to hide. The final night of their arrangement arrived with a company gala held beneath chandeliers that sparkled like constellations. Adelaide walked beside him in a crimson gown that made the whole room turn. For the first time all week, she wasn't performing. She let herself enjoy the warmth of his presence. Everything was perfect until a board member approached her with venom dressed as small talk. "Buying affection again, Adelaide?" Her body went rigid. The words cut deeper than they should have. Carter saw it instantly, the old wound reopening. He stepped forward, his voice firm but controlled. "She doesn't buy affection," he said. "She earns loyalty. Something you clearly wouldn't understand." The entire room fell silent. Adelaide turned toward him slowly, her eyes wide with something bordering awe. No one had ever defended her like that. Not as a CEO. Not as a tool. Not as a symbol. As a woman. Later, when the room emptied and rain streaked the hall's glass walls, she stood trembling with her back to him. She whispered that the arrangement had served its purpose. That she had no right to want more than what she'd paid for. Carter's chest pulled tight, but he understood the truth she struggled to voice. She didn't feel unlovable, she felt unwanted. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. "You weren't buying companionship," he said quietly. "You were reminding yourself it still exists." But he knew he couldn't stay. Haven needed him more than any contract or connection. So he walked away, leaving her standing in the echo of her own confession. She didn't call out. She didn't chase him. She simply let him go, because she didn't believe she deserved anything different. And that was the lie that would break everything open the next day. Sunlight pushed through the hospital blinds the next morning, bright and uninvited, spreading across the room where Carter sat beside Haven. She was still asleep, her small hand wrapped around two of his fingers the way she did when she wanted reassurance even in her dreams. The beeping of her monitors was steady, but every sound reminded him how fragile her life had become, how dependent she was on treatment he still had no idea how to afford. His mind replayed the night before in brutal detail. The gala, the moment he defended Adelaide, the way she'd looked at him afterward as if he'd reached inside her chest and touched something no one had touched in years. And then the way she stood near the rain-streaked glass, trembling, trying not to show it, whispering the arrangement was over. Not because she didn't want more, but because she didn't think she was allowed to. He had walked away because he had to. Haven came first, always. But walking away didn't erase the knot in his chest or the memory of Adelaide's eyes when he left. Eyes that looked like someone being abandoned all over again. Maybe he should have said something different, something better. But life doesn't pause to give you the right script. You do the best you can in the moment, and sometimes your best is a mess of fear and instinct. He brushed a strand of hair off Haven's forehead. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Daddy?" "Morning, starshine," he murmured. She blinked up at him, still half asleep. "Did the pretty lady visit again?" His throat tightened. "Not today, sweetheart." Haven frowned the small, thoughtful frown she always made before saying something heartbreakingly sincere. Maybe she's sad. Kids see things adults are too stubborn, or too scared, to recognize. Haven had met Adelaide for 20 minutes and somehow understood her loneliness better than half the city. Before Carter could respond, the door opened. Adelaide Monroe walked in. No red dress this time. No armor. No corporate mask. She stood in the doorway holding a slim folder, her fingers clenched around it like she'd been gripping it the entire drive there. Her hair was tied back in a loose, imperfect knot, something he'd never seen before, and the makeup she usually hid behind was gone. What remained was the woman she'd spent years burying. Carter stood reflexively, shocked. "Adelaide. I need to talk to you," she said softly. Not a command. Not an order. A request. Haven sat up straighter, eyes bright. "Hi, pretty lady." For the first time since he'd met her, Adelaide gave Haven a real smile, a small, trembling one, but real enough to make Carter's chest go warm in a way he didn't want to examine too closely. "Hi, Haven," she said gently. "I brought something for your dad. And for you." She handed the folder to Carter. His fingers brushed hers, and she didn't pull back. He opened it, expecting something predictable, maybe the final payment, maybe legal papers ending their arrangement. But the first page wasn't a contract. It was a receipt. A paid-in-full receipt. Haven's treatment. Every step. Every cost. Every medication. Every future procedure already covered. Carter's breath caught. "Adelaide, what is this? What did you?" "I funded everything," she said, voice low but steady. "All of it. Permanently." He stared at her, unable to form a coherent reaction. "I didn't do it as part of the deal," she added quickly, almost defensively. "This isn't payment. You already finished the arrangement. This isn't about the money or the board or the stupid image they force me to maintain." Her voice wavered. "This is a gift. From me to Haven. And from me to you." Carter felt the floor tilt under him. He'd spent years fighting a system built to break people like him, and now someone had shattered the barrier he kept slamming into. Not with pity. Not with charity. With intention. With everything you've done for me this week, Adelaide continued, her tone cracking, you showed me something I thought I'd lost permanently. Something I didn't think I could feel again. Haven looked between them innocently. Love? Adelaide froze. Carter froze. The room froze. Kids don't hesitate to say the words adults choke on. Adelaide swallowed hard, turning away as tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She fought them the same way she fought everything, quietly, fiercely, and stubbornly. Haven, Carter whispered, trying not to break into pieces, why don't you draw something for Miss Adelaide? Haven nodded enthusiastically and grabbed her crayons. As soon as her attention shifted, Carter stepped closer to Adelaide. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. It's too much. Her gaze lifted to his, raw, vulnerable, unguarded. It's not enough. He shook his head. Adelaide. Let me finish, she insisted. I built my entire life on power, on being untouchable, on being the person no one could hurt. And it worked. They stopped hurting me. But they also stopped seeing me. Everyone sees my position, my influence, my reputation. No one sees me. And you think I do? Carter asked. I know you do, she said simply. For 1 week, you treated me like a person, not a title. You defended me when you didn't have to. You listened when I didn't deserve it. You walked away even though I was begging you not to, not out loud, but I was. Carter looked down, breath shaking. I walked away because I had to. Haven comes first. I know, she said. And that's why I'm here. She took a small step toward him, close enough that he could see the faint freckles on her cheeks she usually covered with makeup. Carter, I don't want an arrangement. I don't want a contract. I don't want a lie. Her eyes glistened. I want a chance. A real one. He exhaled, overwhelmed. Adelaide, your world and mine are too different. Then I'll walk into yours, she said without hesitation. If you'll let me. Before he could respond, Haven hopped off the bed and ran toward them holding a drawing. Look. It's all three of us. Daddy, me, and the pretty lady. Adelaide crouched down to her level. It's beautiful. It's us, Haven said proudly. We're a team now. Adelaide's composure crumbled, not dramatically, not loudly, but in a quiet, devastating way. Tears filled her eyes, and she didn't fight them this time. Carter watched her, feeling something inside him shift, like a lock turning after years of being stuck. He wasn't a man who fell quickly. Life had beaten that out of him. But this wasn't quick. This wasn't infatuation. This was two broken people finding pieces of themselves in each other. Haven hugged Adelaide around the neck, and Adelaide froze, not because she didn't want the hug, but because she wasn't used to it. Slowly, carefully, she wrapped her arms around Haven and held on. Carter felt something in his chest finally exhale. They stepped out of the hospital together later that afternoon, sunlight spilling across the pavement like a blessing after a long storm. No cameras. No audience. No scripts. Just a man, a woman, and a child walking into a future none of them expected. Adelaide reached for Carter's hand, in a small, uncertain gesture that carried more hope than any grand declaration. He didn't make her wait. He took her hand gently, firmly, like anchoring something that had floated too far for too long. Haven skipped between them, swinging their hands like she was conducting the rhythm of their lives. Daddy, she asked. Are we okay now? Carter looked down at her, then at Adelaide, who stared back at him with a softness that didn't exist a week ago. Yeah, Haven, he said quietly. We're okay. Adelaide squeezed his hand. Haven smiled at the sky. And for the first time in years, Carter believed the words coming out of his own mouth. They weren't a perfect family. They weren't even an official one yet. But love doesn't need perfection. It needs timing, honesty, courage, and sometimes a week you never saw coming. For Adelaide, love wasn't something she bought. For Carter, worth wasn't something measured in money. For Haven, the future wasn't something to fear anymore. They walked forward together, three people with broken histories stepping into a future that, finally, didn't feel impossible. 1 week changed everything. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes it walks in soaked from the rain, drops an envelope on your table, and rewrites your entire life.